Oh,
All
I
right.
don't know even a thing about that one.
Oh, it's a good one. All right. So my guest is Larry Schweikart. He's the author of The Patriot History of Globalism, Its Rise and Decline. Larry Schweikart has won a wide acclaim for his number one New York Times bestseller, A Patriot's History of the United States, which, by the way, I read and I love. It's a great book.
Thank you.
Larry, thanks for joining me today.
It was my pleasure, Charles.
Larry, you talk about the rise of globalism and how that has impacted America. Of course, this is an interesting theory. I mean, various people have a lot of different takes on the origin of it. From a spiritual standpoint, I view it as going back to the Garden of Eden,
Hmm.
when the serpent told Eve that she could be like God and she could know all things, good and evil, in the planet, and thus overthrow God. And I derive that from the introductory chapter, the letter to his children, written by Whittaker Chambers in the book Witness, which
Hmm.
I think where he captured that. Your theory, which is amazing, goes back to the defeat of Napoleon and the rise of the great powers of Europe. So let's start from there and we'll bring it up to today.
Sure. Well, I think one of the most important themes of the book is this is nothing new. As you say, it goes back to the Garden of Eden. Others would say back to the Tower of Babel. But it's always been around where some people are trying to control other people. But
Hmm.
what we saw with the fall of Napoleon was for the first time, large groups of people, in Napoleon's case, monarchs, tried to set up a new world order of the day. And just like they do with the post World War I era, with the Versailles Conference, with the UN after World War II, it's always for the good of the people. We're always going to do this for the good of the people. That's what
Oh
they
yeah.
say in public. But then, as you read in the chapter, behind closed doors, they're saying something much different. And many of the participants of the Congress of Vienna are going, this has nothing to do with the people at all. We're moving populations around to please kings.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's also part of the great, probably what I would argue is the greatest hoax of modern history, which is Karl Marx's communism. The
Hmm.
idea that somehow this is a system that's going to be helping the working person, helping the little guy, that all you need to do is transfer your powers to this enlightened elite who will then take care of everything and they'll make sure that everything is evenly distributed and they'll create a one world ant colony. But we're talking here about the the kind of the aristocracy of Europe and eventually their clash and the collapse of their vision of world order, which led to World War One and then World War Two.
Right. And you know what's interesting? One of the most famous globalists of all is Henry Kissinger. And he
Mm-hmm.
praised the Congress of Vienna. Oh, this is such a wonderfully preserved peace. I'm going, wait a minute. There were two major European wars between 1815 and 1900, the Crimean War and the Franco Prussian War. Did I miss peace in there somewhere? I mean, it's a war about every 30 or 40 years, right?
Right,
So
right.
you get up to World War One, and Woodrow Wilson and his cadre of elites arrive, and they're going to fix things. They're going to make things all wonderful for all the people. They do exactly what the monarchs did. They start moving around entire blocks of people. Millions of people move from Germany into Poland, from Poland into Czechoslovakia, on and on and on, without ever once consulting the people. And so it gets to be quite a common reoccurrence of these elites just completely ignoring what the people want and moving forward with their own agenda.
Right, and it's the exact opposite of the American conception, which is that rights come from the people under God. Kissinger, I think, referred to Count von Metternich as his mentor,
Yeah.
who was the Austrian count at the Council of Vienna. And they basically, as you say, I mean, it led to the development of these super states in the middle of Europe, namely Germany, which was a hyper nationalist, socialistic state, and this led to conflict, of course, with the Anglo-American establishment, as established by Cecil Rhodes,
Hmm.
and as described by Professor Carroll Quigley of Georgetown University in his book Tragedy of Hope. So you
Hmm.
have this colossal international clash between and competition between these superpowers who sought to dominate world order. So here we are now after World War II and the collapse of Nazi Germany, the rise of the Soviet international entity, and then eventually that collapse in 1990. Francis Fukuyama, the social theorist, wrote The End of Time, where he says that now the United States is the last standing hegemony in the world, the last controlling power. But what he failed to talk about was who is running the United States.
Well, let me go, and I don't want to spend too much time on Napoleon, but there's some amazing stuff in that first chapter. And you mentioned Metternich,
Mm-hmm.
and Metternich was he's a very shrewd politician, but he's also love struck with this woman called the Countess of Dagon, as was Alexander of Russia. And these two guys are vying for her attention the whole time. They're supposedly carving up Europe, and there's one great scene where all of the other people at the Congress of Vienna, the Castlereagh and Alex and some of the others, are all in a corner looking at maps. And Metternich's over in another corner writing love letters to the Countess of Dagon. And it reminded me of that scene in the 90s where Bill Clinton was on the phone, literally deploying troops in Yugoslavia and bombing missions in Yugoslavia. And he was, well, shall we say, being getting the attentions of one Monica Lewinsky, right?
Right. So it sounds like Helen of Troy, if you want to look at it
Really?
historically, who led to the war between in the Iliad and the Odyssey, or even the rape of Lucretia, which led to the Roman Empire.
Right.
So you have these situations where this incredible woman steps in, and everybody goes berserk.
Well, let's
So
get back to your Fukuyama comment, who's
yeah,
running America. Before we do that, what Fukuyama missed was that all of that was taking place under the Bretton Woods Agreement and the post World War II financial globalism that was set up in order to control world trade. And for people who don't know, Bretton Woods did a lot of things, set up the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank. But the most important thing it did was it established an unwritten agreement in which the rest of the world would sign on to free trade protected by the US military and especially the US Navy. We're seeing some problems of that in the Gulf right now, where neither our Navy nor the Brit Navy can really protect all of these flankers from lunatics like the Houthis,
right.
whoever they are. and
Right,
so,
some kind of Iranian-backed proxy, I think. But you're talking about the World Trade Organization, which was the third leg in the stool of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, and that was a kind of a world order institution that would basically transfer the right to regulate trade, which is a constitutional right for this American Republic, to this faceless body of international bureaucrats
right.
that would then be able to penalize American companies and penalize the United States for trade imbalances or lack of agreements that they decide arbitrarily should be in place. And then, of course, the new stool in the chair, and you get into this in your book, Larry, is the World Health Organization and their hegemony over what constitutes health crisis. And they certainly flexed their muscles during the so-called pandemic, and I think that most people now know that there were elements of that were grossly overblown.
Right. Well, and I think most people today, if offered a chance of the Who, the rock band, or the Who, the World Health Organization would gladly take the rock band over
Oh
that.
yeah,
But let
sure.
me go back to your earlier comments about the international trade and development and all that stuff. Bretton Woods was set up with this notion that the dollar would be the basis for all international trade. But
Right.
that in itself relied on an undergirding notion that the dollar would be as good as gold. Now, we were not on the gold standard, but by and large, people, the dollar was pretty sound. The problem was that the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, all of these trade agreements, international trade agreements, required the US to spend money on international aid, what we call foreign aid. And more of this spending drove up deficits, which made the dollar less and less and less valuable. So this was something called Triffin's dilemma. An economist recognized this early on, that there were contradictions built into the very Bretton Woods Agreement that would cause it to unravel. And we are certainly seeing that unravel now. So then they had to turn to other things, which is, as you mentioned, medical globalism.
So you're talking about in your book, A Patriot's History of Globalism, Its Rise and Decline, a point at which, and you can't define it by exact dates, but there is a decline in this globalist entity. And I think that you seem to be tracing that to the um, inexact value of the American dollar, maybe the rise of the BRICS nations, which are now talking about depegging from the dollar as the international unit of currency that was set at the world at the International Monetary Fund convention at Bretton Woods, and that and also, I mean, in 1970, President Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard, which
Mm-hmm.
created fluctuations that maybe were unforeseen. So you have essentially a demonetization or a decentralization of the world's monetary system. Is that the
Right.
point of departure where the globalist agenda is declining?
The departure from Bretton Woods begins to unravel really with the Afghanistan and Iraq wars. And you start to see the massive military spending. Whether you agree with the premise or not, the result is that gradually the public came to say, we're tired of this kind of overseas adventurism and expense. And the US budget started to just explode, whether it was under Bush or Obama or Trump or certainly Biden, whom I
Right.
affectionately call the rutabaga. It's just absolutely exploded under these guys. And the public is saying no more. I mean, I think the sentiment against war, certainly whether it's Iran or anywhere else, is very high right now, which makes it very difficult for Biden to do anything, because he's trying to slip us into a war through Yemen while we're all watching Iran. But I'm not sure how far that will go. So it's a twin path of moving away from globalism. One is the breakdown of Bretton Woods, which is really outlined very well by Peter Zehan in a number of books. And then the other is this growth of the U.S. debt and deficit, and a increasing reluctance of Americans to spend money on other people, since we don't even have it to spend on ourselves.
Well, okay, and the other leg of the breakdown is, as you mentioned, it was sort of implemented during the Wilson administration with the embrace of what was called by historian Charles Austin Beard perpetual war for perpetual peace. And that was a policy of the international establishment from that time right up through Kissinger and right up actually to Trump. Trump kind of put a stop to that to a certain extent, which is maybe at least one of the reasons why this international elite fears and despises him and seeks to put him in prison. And that is that he did no longer would engage in these adventures of nation building and intervention where we were constantly overseas fighting wars. He
Right.
began, he wasn't an isolationist by any means, but he did begin to wind down these interventions. He demanded that the NATO nations pay for their own defense, which was the first time that that had happened, even though
Right.
successive administrations, both Democrat and Republican, gave lip service to that. Trump got it done. You know, they're now dealing with their own defense. And at the same time, the nations of the world, particularly Russia and China, did not engage in adventures during his administration because he created an aura of uncertainty in terms of what we might do. Now we're back to the
Well,
old, rotten Anglo-American establishment policy of international perpetual war for perpetual peace. It's been a return to that.
yeah, he, of course, he made the famous trip to Korea, the only American president to actually meet with Kim.
Right.
And he said, I'll meet with anybody. I'll meet with Putin. I'll meet with Xi. I'll meet
Of
with
course.
Kim. We can talk this out. Now, the one exception to that was ISIS, which he crushed without hardly any American casualties. And one of the main ways he did this was he just ordered a drone hit on Soleimani, and that pretty much put those guys out of business.
Indeed.
So, did he want to move away from that? Absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right. That's why he is so detested and feared by the international elites, as he doesn't play this game. He doesn't play the perpetual debt game. He wants to bring businesses back to America. I'm sure you saw yesterday he met with the United Auto Workers in Washington, which I predicted he would cater
Yes.
to the unions. Huge. That's amazingly big. If
Oh,
he were
and the rank and file, even the head of the UAW acknowledged when he endorsed Biden that the rank and file are major supporters of Trump, and that Trump, as a businessman, brought something different to the table, which was why he was able to get the Abraham Accords done, and that was moving forward at the time. Unthinkable, never done before, going all the way back. And of course, now Biden has thrown that right in the garbage with releasing billions of dollars to Iran, which is now they're using to help fuel the Houthis and attacking American bases in Syria and Iraq, and funding Hezbollah, which is attacking Israel on
right,
its northern border. So you have a complete instability, not to mention giving $1 billion to UNRWA, which helped fund the attack out of Hamas in
right,
Gaza. So you have this return to this amoral, divide and conquer Anglo American policy under Biden. And I think that Americans are aware of that. You talk about the overall decline, which is I find very interesting, of the globalist order. They certainly are either taking their last gasps right now under Biden, or they're going to implement this. These people don't mess around. I mean, they're
true.
not going to give up quietly. We don't know what could happen between now and election day, or even if Trump wins, what could happen. What do you
Well,
see? Do you think that they're on the way out, or do you think they're going to further consolidate their power?
I don't want to spike the football yet, but I think that they're on their heels like they have never been before. When you look at the Supreme Court, by the way, Trump's court picks haven't agreed with them on everything, but man, they've just been nailing it on rolling back the deep state. And I talked to
Mm,
Steve Bannon about this. I said, what was going through your mind when you guys would present a list of names to him? And he said the number one question they tested these applicants with was the Chevron doctrine, that was even above the social concerns like abortion. And well, you're seeing that the EPA, West Virginia versus the EPA. You saw it in the Jarkizi versus SEC case, which has now been appealed. There were a couple of other of these cases where the court is consistently ruling against the deep state and the administrative state being able to define its own powers. And
hmm
so the Jarkizi appeal is coming up very soon, and all indications are that Gorsuch is leading the charge on overturning the Chevron doctrine. So that's a very important step against the deep state judicially and in terms of regulation. You look in terms of elections. I saw that 7 European nations have moved toward a more populist government here just in the last 2 months, and that doesn't include Slovakia, Hungary, Estonia, Italy, which had already had more populist elections, and then our friend down there in Argentina,
Oh yes,
another
Malay.
guy who read him the riot act at Davos. That was pretty cool.
Oh,
But
incredible!
Davos,
And El Salvador, they basically cleaned up their drug cartel. So, and Taiwan has elected a pro-Taiwan
right?
prime minister who's up standing up to China. So, yes, it is a worldwide movement toward a common sense nationalism, putting one's nation first. It's I think that there's moves in Canada for Poilievre as well. And so we're seeing this development and it's really moving on. What is this? You mentioned the World Economic Forum in your book. I got that in your press release. What went on there and what are they? I mean, as I say, these guys aren't sitting around twiddling their thumbs. I mean, they mean business. What do you think they're going to try to pull?
Well, their big push, and this is the next to the last chapter, has been climate change. which is, nonsense. The climate always changes. It's changed for thousands of years.
Right.
Um, and this whole push for electric vehicles, which I think is really interesting. They kind of put their eggs in the electric vehicle, the wind and solar baskets, and those are all coming unraveled. We saw two big wind power companies pull out of contracts on the East Coast in the last month. Um, every day, new news surfaces about how bad the electric cars
Oh
are
yeah.
in terms of weight. I had one in my today's news, for example, that Canada is figuring out because they're heavier cars, their guardrails won't hold the cars in. And so
I
they're going
think
to have
that
to replace.
didn't Ford Motor Company just cancel the
Yeah,
development of an entire line of electric cars, and that they don't work well in very cold and very hot climates.
right,
You
right.
know,
And
so
they don't go well with water either. You don't want to get those batteries wet.
plus the
So,
batteries themselves. I mean, that's a they like to wrap themselves in ecology. That's a disaster waiting to happen 5, 10 years down the road. Those toxic metals are going to be creating landfills that
right.
are going to be a world problem.
And the same
So
thing with the wind turbine blades are equally not biodegradable. They're a huge problem. The lithium mining that's using child labor, a huge problem. Every place they turn, my point at the end of the book is that any path they go down right now, they are in trouble. They are on the defensive, and they're I think fighting a rearguard action. And to go back to Napoleon, the only question is whether Murat's cavalry can encircle them and outrun them and get to the main body
yeah.
before it escapes.
Well, that brings me to my final point here, which is that they are openly running against President Trump, not on any issues because they know they'll lose those, and they
Right,
are losing them, but on an effort to basically put him in prison.
right,
God forbid they may even consider the JFK solution.
right.
What do you see? I mean, I think these are very perilous times,
They are.
especially since Trump is now clearly, has the Republican nomination in his grasp, and he's ahead in all the polls, particularly the battleground states.
Right,
We can get into the question of the 2020 election. Let's leave that there. But either way, we know that they can't steal it this time, even if they did. I mean, because of the overwhelming attention and light that's being shined on that, and because of the great growth in numbers, particularly among minorities, black men in particular, and younger people. What
yeah.
do you
Well,
think they're going to do? I mean, are they going to get him? Are they going to get him that way? Are they going to? I mean, they seem to be twisting the entire system of jurisprudence out of proportion in order to do it.
right. They launched a two-pronged attack, one civil court with this E. Jean Carroll and the whole attack on his assets
Mm.
in New York, and one in criminal courts, the three cases. All of my court sources, including my friend Zen Master, a federal court guy who's never been wrong yet, say that none of those criminal cases are going to come to fruition before the election. And so basically, they shot their wad on that. They knew it when Smith wanted a quick resolution from the Supreme Court, and they said "niet." And
Uh-huh.
what's interesting is that I think a guy named Shipwreck Crew wrote that the Supreme Court is going to rule in favor of Trump, but they're not going to leave their fingerprints on it, and they're just going to do it by delaying it past the election when it will become moot. Now, as to the other civil cases, those will probably be overturned at some point. So they're not going to get him out by lawfare, or as I call it, indict fair. That's not going to work. But something else is happening, and I call it the two Democrat civil wars. One is Israel versus Hamas, Jews against Muslims, and Biden cannot take a position on that one way or the other because he'll lose the other group, and he
Mm.
can't afford to lose either of those groups. So he's just got to shut up. Trump is already on record as saying, let us have peace. U.S. grant, let us have peace, right? The other
Yeah,
one,
and Trump, by the way, is picking up support among the Muslims of
yeah,
Tehran.
yeah, yeah,
So because they're more conservative on social issues. So there's different ways. The other thing, I mean, that the Democrats, one of their last gasps, of course, is Taylor Swift. But I don't know. Your young girls are gonna. I mean, it's sad, but it says a lot about the electorate today. But that's what one of the things they're trying to pull off. Anyway, Larry, let my listeners and viewers know where they can get your excellent book.
Okay, so you can get A Patriot's History of Globalism, Its Rise and Decline, at Amazon for pre-order. It'll be out in 2 weeks. You can also soon find it on my website, thewildworldofhistory.com. And, that's my general website. If you want to talk politics, I have a political site called thewildworldofpolitics.com.
Excellent, Larry. Listen, thanks so much for joining me. We should do it again, certainly before the election. Thank you
Sure,
very
Carl.
much.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Take care.